fulfilled the prophecies of Jesus. Throughout the Old Testament, there were many prophecies that foretold of a future Messiah. Jesus claimed to be the Messiah, and in fulfilling these prophecies it proves he is who he says he is. These prophecies include the Messiah will be born of a virgin and will die and defeat Satan. The Messiah will be a prophet like Moses. The Messiah will be crucified and cursed by God. The Messiah will be born of a virgin. The Messiah will be a Prince of Peace. The Messiah will suffer for the sins of others and atone for them. The Messiah will be the Son of God and will suffer. The Messiah will be the Son of God. The Messiah will rise from the dead. The Messiah will cry out for God and be crucified. The Messiah will rise from the dead. The Messiah will be the Son of God and escape from Egypt. The Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. The Messiah will be a descendant of King David. The Messiah will ride on a donkey. The Messiah will be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. The Messiah will be raised in Nazareth. Since Jesus fulfilled all of these prophecies that were made hundreds to thousands of years before he was born, this proves he really is the Messiah. Or at least it seems like this on the surface level. In reality, the majority of these prophecies do not apply to Jesus once read in proper context. Let's break them down one by one. In Genesis 3 verse 15, God promises that the offspring of a woman will crush the head of the serpent after the serpent strikes him. However, this verse is said during God punishing the serpent for tricking Adam and Eve. So when God describes that there will be conflict between the woman's offspring and the serpent's offspring, it is clearly referring to humanity, not a Messiah born of a virgin. Also, the idea that the serpent is Satan is found nowhere in the Old Testament, and it appears to simply be an ordinary snake here. Therefore, this verse is clearly just describing the general conflict between humans and snakes, not Satan and the Messiah. So this verse is clearly not a prophecy at all. In Deuteronomy 18 verse 15, Moses describes that God will raise another prophet like him in the future. However, at the end of Deuteronomy it is stated that since Moses, no other prophet has ever achieved his level of greatness, so it is unlikely this was meant to be a prophecy about a Messiah greater than Moses. Considering that the very next verse after this is about Joshua being raised up as a prophet, it is more likely that this prophecy was referring to Joshua, not a Messiah, and definitely not Jesus. In Deuteronomy 21 verse 23, it is described that his body shall be hung on a tree and be cursed by God. However, this verse is from a section describing the rules for Israelites, so this is a law, not a prophecy. Furthermore, the wording of hung and of tree makes it clear this verse is referring to being literally hung on a tree with a noose and not crucified on a cross. In this verse, it is described, virgin will conceive a child. However, this is actually a mistranslation of the Hebrew word alma. More accurate efforts have instead translated this as a young woman. So this verse does not directly address a virgin birth, and the description of being born of a young woman can apply to nearly everyone, so this does not prove Jesus is the Messiah. In this verse, it is described the Messiah will be a Prince of Peace. However, despite popular belief, Jesus never actually claimed to be a Prince of Peace. So if anything, this verse is proof against Jesus being the Messiah, not for. In this verse, it is described that a suffering servant will suffer for people's sins, which will heal. However, the traditional understanding of this verse by Jewish scholars is that it is referring to the nation of Israel, not a Messiah. Additionally, it claims the suffering servant will commit no violence, but Jesus claimed to bring a sword, flip tables in the temple out of anger, and curse a fig tree out of anger. The suffering servant is also described to have offspring, but the New Testament never records Jesus having any children. In this verse, God describes how he will strike his son. However, the verse also describes how God will do this as a punishment when his son does wrong. This contradicts the idea of a sinless Jesus in Christianity, so this clearly does not align with Jesus. In this verse, God describes about his son. However, contrary to popular belief, being the Son of God was not a special title in the Old Testament. David, Jeremiah, Ephraim, Samuel, Adam, the Hebrew judges, and unknown beings in Genesis 6 are called sons of God. Moreover, all Israelites are described as sons of God in Exodus 4 verse 22. So the title of Son of God is not a special title for a Messiah, so this verse is not a messianic prophecy. God also refers to becoming his Father today, which contradicts the idea of Jesus being the eternal Son of God. Also, in the New Testament, the Pharisees claim God as their Father, but they are not claiming to be the Messiah, so this does not prove Jesus is the Messiah. In this verse, God is described as not abandoning someone to the land of the dead. However, when read in context, this verse is clearly about sparing believers from disaster in life, not about raising someone, let alone a Messiah, from the dead. In this verse, a person is described as crying out for God for being forsaken and has their hands and feet pierced. However, this is a mistranslation of the word keieru. More accurate efforts have instead translated this as abound. With the context of dogs mentioned earlier in this psalm, it is clear this verse is describing dogs attacking and biting, not someone being crucified. Additionally, Jesus crying out for God for forsaking him is strange, as it seems to contradict him being the Messiah with a plan and foreknowledge of his death. In this verse, God is described as raising someone up from the land of the dead and restoring them to life. However, reading the context makes it clear this verse is referring to David, not Jesus. In this verse, God describes bringing his son out of Egypt. However, reading the full verse with the opening that is often edited out, it reads, "When Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt I called my son." This clearly shows the verse is about the nation of Israel, not Jesus. Additionally, with the reference to Israel being a child, it is clear this is referring to a past event. Therefore, it is likely this verse is referring to the exodus of Israelite slaves out of Egypt through Moses, not a messianic prophecy. In this verse, a ruler is described as being born in Bethlehem. However, the idea that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem is found in no source before the 4th century, long after Jesus. On the contrary, it was widely believed by Jews that the birthplace of the Messiah would be a secret. It is more likely that this verse refers to clan of Bethlehem, the sons of Caleb, and not a Messiah. In this verse, the Messiah is described as being a descendant of King David. At first, it appears Jesus fulfilled this by having Joseph as his father, who is a descendant of King David. However, this idea is undermined by the fact that Jesus is supposed to have been born of a virgin, so he would have no biological relation to David. Moreover, the account of Jesus' lineage from David is completely different in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke. Additionally, the family trees are identical from Abraham to David, but radically differ from David onwards. This difference makes it likely that this section of the family tree was fabricated to make Jesus appear a descendant of David. In this verse, the Messiah is described as riding a donkey. In all 4 Gospels of the New Testament, Jesus is indeed described as riding a donkey. However, the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is described as riding on 2 animals, while in the Gospels of Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus is described as riding on only 1 animal. The contradiction here makes a claim of fulfillment difficult, and it is more likely this verse was fabricated or exaggerated to fulfill the prophecy. In this verse, a man is described as betraying his friend for 30 pieces of silver. However, when read in context, this passage is clearly about a past event with Zechariah and not a prophecy. Additionally, the Gospel of Matthew incorrectly cites this verse as being from Jeremiah, which undermines the credibility of this being a fulfilled prophecy. The Gospel of Matthew claims that Jesus being raised in Nazareth fulfilled the messianic prophecy that he shall be called a Nazarene. However, this prophecy appears nowhere in the Old Testament. Some claim this is referring to Judges 13 verse 5, where it is described that the boy shall be a Nazirite. However, a Nazirite is a person who practices asceticism and has no link to being born in Nazareth. Additionally, the verse when read in context refers to Samson, not a future Messiah. Isaiah 53 verse 2 is also cited as it describes the suffering servant as growing up from a shoot, or in Hebrew a nester. However, this has no connection to Nazareth, and this wordplay is non-existent in the original Greek of Matthew. Thanks for watching. I will make my next video about proofs for the resurrection of Jesus as soon as I can.